You are now listening to 1-900 Old Ladies, The Lost Art of Making Lefse, written by L. Lee Starr, narrated by the author. Post-production by Pinto Media. Chapter 19. Dr. Jim McDaniel stood over the naked corpse of a 24-year-old male who was partially draped in blue paper. He also dressed in scrubs and a disposable blue surgical gown. He wore a white plastic apron and a pair of safety goggles to shield himself from blood splatters. A paper mask obscured his lower face, and his hands were covered with partially bloodied latex gloves. He held a scalpel in his right hand and a pair of hemostats in his left. There was a small microphone suspended above the autopsy table. As he performed the autopsy, he verbally walked himself through the examination, dictating the patient history. For his external examination, he noted details regarding any visual observations, palpations, lacerations, bruises, or scarring of the corpse. Then he proceeded with the internal examination of the deceased. He made a large, Y-shaped incision which extended from the shoulder blades of the body. His strategic cuts met at the bottom of the young man's breastbone. He exposed the chest cavity. His anatomical pathology technologist, Kim Jeffries, stood nearby and handed him a saw. She donned similar attire, wearing a disposable gown, gloves, apron, and a mask. Once Dr. McDaniel had freed the ribs and sternum of the young man's body with the saw, Kim assisted him with lifting up the chest plate. That enabled Dr. McDaniel to visualize all the thoracic organs inside the young man's chest. Dr. McDaniel was a skilled pathologist, having practiced medicine for almost 30 years. His assistant, Kim, was a young woman in her early 30s. She had been working with him for the last 8 years. She was a slender woman of medium height. Her light blonde hair was curly but short. Although she wore round John Lennon spectacles and a little makeup, she was quite naturally attractive. As he meticulously cut, exposed, studied, and weighed the deceased and various parts of the deceased, the examination room phone rang. He whispered a small curse under his breath, annoyed to be interrupted in the middle of his work. "Answer it, would you, Kim?" "Sure." She set her tools on the nearby metal cart and removed her gloves. She pulled her face mask below her chin to answer the phone. It was the security guard at the front desk who had recently started his shift for the evening. "Jim, there's someone out at the front desk waiting to see you," his assistant informed him. "I don't want to see anyone right now. Tell them I'm in the middle of something." Kim relayed his message to the security guard. She looked bewildered and held up the phone. "Ed says the visitor's name is Marge Carter?" Disgusted, Jim shook his head. He angrily snapped off his gloves into the biohazard trash bin and removed his mask. "Give me the phone," he ordered. "Put her on the line," he instructed Ed on the other end. Marge took the phone. "Marge, I'm in the middle of something. Why couldn't you wait to meet me later? I told you I have to work late." At first, Jim seemed annoyed to discover that Marge had stopped by his work unannounced. Soon, however, his face softened as she spoke to him. "I see. You thought I could give you a tour, huh?" He seemed amused that Marge had such an interest in his work. But then again, Marge was one of the few women he had ever dated who wasn't grossed out by things like dead or dismembered bodies. She seemed to actually enjoy it in a disturbingly amusing sort of way. For Jim, that was a refreshing change from his ex-wife, Lila. She never took an interest in his work. She was repulsed by the mere thought of it. She often proudly told strangers that her husband was a doctor. But when they quizzed Lila for specifics about Jim's specialty, she shamefully admitted, "He's a horizontal doctor." Jim now smiled. "Okay, you got to give me 30 minutes so I can get this guy's chest put back together. Wait out there, and I'll come get you." He hung up the phone. "New girlfriend?" Kim inquired. "Something like that," Jim answered. That's totally not like you, Jim. You sure you know what you're doing? Not at all, he stated. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. After Dr. McDaniel had weighed and reassembled the organs back into the body of his latest autopsy, he discarded his surgical gown and personal protective equipment. He dismissed his assistant for the evening and met Marge at the security desk out front. He nodded to the security guard on duty. Thanks, Ed. Really, Marge, why did you decide to come here? He asked. You'd been talking about your job, and I thought it might be fun to get a tour. You know, maybe get to know your patients, she joked. She shrugged her shoulders. He led Marge through the security access door to his exam room. The acrid scent of formalin, death, and disinfectant filled the room. Marge held her nose. Ew! It friggin' stinks in here, Jim. You kind of get used to it after 30 years, he stated. Phew! No, I don't think I could ever get used to that smell. I wouldn't mind the blood and guts and dead people nearly as much as I would that chemical smell. Ugh! Margie gagged. The autopsy room had only 2 bodies lying out on dissection tables. These were long stainless steel tables, which had a reservoir for excess blood to drain when the bodies were cut open. Of course, dead bodies had no circulating blood, but the removal of vital organs for weighing and tissue sampling could still be quite messy, depending on the manner of death and the corpse's stage of decomposition. The 2 bodies were strategically draped in sheets. Marge studied the silhouettes of the bodies in Jim's current caseload. One looked to be rather slender in build, the other was substantially larger. His blackened hand poked out from under the sheet. It was clear that body had been decomposing for quite some time. She walked over to the thin body. Is this the guy you're working on? She asked. Can I see? Well, really, I'm not supposed to. Before Jim could finish his sentence, Marge flipped the sheet down to expose the young man's face. He's kind of young. Too bad. What a waste. Nice looking, too. What'd he die of? Drug overdose, most likely. They found him dead in his apartment a week ago. Really, Marge, I'm not supposed to tell you about this stuff. It's confidential. Don't worry, I don't know who this guy is. He could be anybody for that matter. It is a shame. I'm surprised. He must not have had a girlfriend, huh? Maybe he did, and that's why I killed himself, Jim smartly remarked. Funny. She lifted the sheet up further to peek underneath. Ooh, looks like you've been hacking him up quite a bit, eh? I had to weigh his heart and lungs. That's what the scale is all about. He pointed to the large spring-loaded scale, which was suspended from a heavy-duty metal stand. She lifted the sheet up even further to obviously catch a glimpse of his genitals. Marge! Jim scolded. She peered out devilishly behind the sheet and grinned. Just checking things out, she teased. Marge flipped the sheet back over the young man's face. She looked over at the second draped body. Who's this guy? She skipped over to the next body, examining the decomposed hand poking out from beneath the sheet. Kind of looks like maybe he's been sitting around a while. Can I see? Sure. I should warn you, Marge. It's pretty gruesome. She pulled the sheet halfway down to reveal the decomposed head and torso of her ex-brother-in-law. Ooh, he was a fatty. What did this guy die of? Marge almost seemed as though she was having fun. A little too much fun, in fact. But Jim perceived her level of engagement in his work as somewhat of an ego boost. He concluded that there really was no harm in discussing the case. Well, he was fat, but he hadn't quite gotten past the bloating stage of decomposition. The Himble County Sheriff's Office sent this guy to me because they found this guy's body dead in his barn. Yeah? What happened to him? Margie asked, listening intently. He was buried under a mountain of heavy metal tools. Apparently, he hoarded tools and machinery in his barn. It was piled almost to the ceiling, Jim stated. So all his tools fell on him and killed him? Marge inquired. Well, yes, they fell on him, but the sheriff was puzzled at how this whole mountain of tools even came to be in the first place, you know. Did the guy pile all his stuff up there or what? I'm not sure they will ever figure that out, how the tools got all piled up on top of each other in the first place, or even how he ended up buried under the heap. This guy walked with a cane. He was shot up during the war, and you can see that he was pretty obese. So I don't think he was physically capable of moving all that stuff by himself. I'm sure he didn't get to be that size unless he had been sitting on his ass his whole life, Margie commented under her breath. What? Jim asked. Nothing. Go on. But that's not what killed the guy, Jim added. Well, I mean, this guy was 75 years old. He was going to die soon. Of old age? Marge asked. I should live to be so old. No, cirrhosis. This guy must have been an alcoholic all his life. His liver was pickled. I don't think he would have had much longer if someone hadn't killed him first, he commented. Upon hearing this later comment, Marge stopped, but she resolved to play it cool. Jim wasn't even aware that she knew Stanley. What makes you think somebody killed him? She asked intently, trying not to seem suspicious. Jim stepped closer to the body as he pointed to it. You can clearly see that this body has decomposed. Yeah? How long do you think he's been dead? She asked. She felt herself starting to tremble, but she tried to remain calm. It's hard to say. I'm guessing this guy was killed late fall, maybe 7 months ago, but it's hard to say. With him being out in the barn, it could have been as late winter or as little as 2 months ago. Basically, somebody killed him and then his body froze there. When it started to warm up about March, he started thawing again and decomposing. That's why there's really no way to tell exactly when he died. Yes, but how do you know somebody killed him? Margie asked again. Well, 2 things. What killed him was that he was stabbed in the chest, right through the heart, one blow. Jim acted all this out for dramatic effect. A very powerful, forceful blow, probably while he was lying there unconscious. He was lying down, but it still must have been somebody with tremendous strength. He wasn't impaled by one of his tools that fell on top of him? Marge inquired. No. From photographs that the sheriff took of the crime scene, there wasn't really anything there in the barn that could have been used as a murder weapon. Must have been something like a screwdriver, probably, with a 12-inch shaft. There were other screwdrivers in the barn, but they were all considerably larger. Definitely not the murder weapon, Jim explained. So you're saying whoever killed him took the murder weapon with them? Marge asked. Yes, Jim stated. You're awfully interested in this case. Oh, well, Margie still tried to play it cool. You know, it's not the typical open and shut case, right? She suddenly turned serious again, still trying to conceal her growing nervousness. But you said there were 2 odd things. What's the other thing? Well, Jim pointed again. You see those bruises on his skull? Yes, Margie replied. His entire head is black and blue. Well, I know he's been sitting around and dead bodies get blacker as time goes on, but his skull was clearly cracked in several places. Of course, it seems like his body is pretty decomposed, but really it's actually pretty well preserved. With the cold winter and it being closed up in that barn, the flies in North Dakota wouldn't have set up maggot larvae until it got sufficiently warm. So what does that mean? She asked. Well, it looks like somebody really whacked the guy in the head over and over. With what? I don't quite know. I would have said with a big round piece of wood, like a baseball bat or a rolling pin or a chair leg maybe, but something blunt. The curious thing about that is that whatever the murderer used to whack this guy's head, it wasn't completely smooth, like a bat or a rolling pin. It almost looks like it was something ribbed. Marge was visibly trembling now. What do you mean, ribbed? Let's see if you can see. Yeah, here on the guy's left temple. I know he's pretty bloated and black, but you can pick out a small area on the skin where it's broken, and the maggots set in. Several uniform lacerations, spaced maybe 1/4 inch apart. Immediately, Margie started panicking as she thought of her sister. Oh my God, Ellie's lefse pin. Jim proceeded to summarize his theory on Stanley's death. Somehow the sky's crap fell down on top of him and trapped him underneath. But he wasn't dead, just trapped under his own tools. Then someone came along, whacked him on the head with something blunt but grooved, fracturing his skull and eventually knocking him unconscious. They took a screwdriver and, with one heavy thrust, drove it deep into his chest. He was dead in seconds. As Jim played out the entire violent scenario of Stanley's death, it dawned on Margie that Ellen must have been his killer. Marge had no clue of how her frail sister might have mustered the energy to not only haul Stanley's tools to the center of the barn, but to whack him repeatedly over the head with her lefse pin, eventually cracking his skull and knocking him out. How could little Ellie have forcefully and unmercifully pierced his heart as she dealt her husband's final death blow? There was no question that Stanley had it coming to him. If Ellen had selected a different weapon with which to assault Stanley, like a hoe or a shovel, Marge might not have figured that Ellen was Stanley's murderer. Ellen was petite and fragile. She didn't possess the stamina to move all that equipment by herself. But by striking Stanley over and over again with the lefse pin, it was almost as if Ellen had left her calling card at the murder scene. This was her Colombian necktie. It was simply a matter of time before Ellen was found out. Jim McDaniel was not a native North Dakotan, and he was unfamiliar with the process of making lefse. He had probably never seen a lefse pin. I should have known when I put Ellie's pin away yesterday that it didn't get that way from rolling potato dough. She had used it to smash in Stanley's skull. Margie started to swoon and her hands began to shake. "Holy crap," she cried. Jim grew suddenly worried. "Hey," he commented, "you look pale, Marge. Have a seat." He pulled up a folding chair for her to sit down in. "Are you okay? Geez, I didn't think you'd get so worked up over this." He apologized. "I'm sorry, Marge. I guess I tend to detach myself from all this gruesomeness, when you've done this for so long." "No, Jim, it's not that. It's just..." Margie stopped herself. "What?" He paused also. Then his eyes widened as if a light bulb just went off in his head. "Hey, don't tell me you knew this guy." Jim shook his head in almost a panic. Marge tried to stall for time while she searched the recesses of her mind for a believable lie. "Oh, shit. Marge, tell me what's going on," Jim demanded. He held her by the shoulders as he glared at her. "I can't," she stated weakly. He started to shake her forcefully. "Margie, tell me, do you know this guy or don't you?" "Yes," she blurted. "He's my brother-in-law, Stanley Peters. My little sister Ellen killed him." She burst into tears. Jim was enraged. He angrily slammed his hand down on the autopsy table, then reflexively shook it in pain. "God damn it! Why didn't you tell me, Marge? I can't be seeing you. Don't you know this is a conflict of interest right here? Shit!" Margie sat wailing as Jim continued his ranting. "You were just using me this whole time. You picked me up at the Peacock knowing that you were going to use me to get information about this case, weren't you?" Then he slammed his hand down on the table once more and yelled, "Fuck!" She quickly gathered her wits about her. She rose to her feet and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Jim, listen to me. You've got to change your report. You've got to help me. My sister is a good woman. You ask anybody in the town, even the sheriff, and they'll tell you Stanley deserved to die. He was a mean, despicable excuse for a human being. He was a drunk, and he abused Ellen and her son for 27 years. If she killed him, he drove her to it." He pushed her away. "Don't touch me." Marge again approached him, pleading, "Please, Jim. She's my sister. She's lost her mind. She's the only thing I have. I can't lose her. Yes, Jim, I did use you, but you've got to know that I did it for my little sister." Jim was almost hysterical. "What the hell do you want from me?" You've got to make up something. Falsify the report. Say Stanley was crushed accidentally. End of story. Nobody'll know. Nobody'll care. Nobody even likes Stanley. Please, Jim. I can't see my baby sister get sent to jail. Marge's face was wet with tears as she pleaded her case. Jim finally calmed himself as he disappointedly shook his head. No, Marge, I can't do that. I would lose my job. I could go to jail. This is all I have. My career is my life. It was now Marge's turn to be enraged. How can he be so damn selfish? What about me? Don't you care about me? I just lost my husband. Now you want me to lose my sister too? I simply can't do that, Marge. I can't file a false report for you. You can't ask me to do that. Then I would lose everything. Now Marge was furious. She picked up her purse and struck Jim in the head. Well, she cried, you've definitely lost me. You can go screw yourself, Dr. James McDaniel III, MD, PhD, because you certainly aren't going to get any more screwing from me.